Faster than a speeding bullet. More powerful than a locomotive. Able to leap tall buildings at a single bound. Look, up in the sky. It's a bird.
It's a plane.
It's Superman.
In my imagination, he's still flying around up there, making the world safe for truth, justice, in the American way. And I still read him, along with Batman and Justice League and just about anything else that catches my eye. Because that's what comic books do, and have done since the 1930s. They catch the eye with garish color and heroic characters, hard knocks fantasy, and exuberant escapism. They never were just for kids.
Comic books began as reprinted collections of newspaper comic strips in the 1920s, given away as come-ons at movie theaters and department stores. Freebies. Here, kid, keep your yap shut. By the mid-1930s, they were dealing with original material, pulp westerns and tough detective stories, funny stuff and wild adventure yarns. Until 1938, when two guys from Cleveland, Ohio, created a character who would change the face of comics forever. Superman's popularity unleashed a barrage of costumed, superpowered imitators. And from that moment, fortunes only seemed to rise. Suddenly, there were hundreds of titles from crime to superheroes, terror to kid stuff. Nearly 1 billion comics were published in 1949 alone. It was a golden age for sexy art and hard-edged storytelling. And then, the bottom fell out. Parents and doctors protested the sex and violence. A new toy called TV ate away at the fantasy market. And by the mid-1970s, a once thriving industry appeared on the brink of extinction. It was the 1950s, a time when everybody liked Ike and a lot of people hated comic books. Comics were in their golden age, wild storytelling, exaggerated, sexy graphics that played off the need for escapism from the Cold War and the bomb. One Dr. Frederick Wortham, however, claimed that they led children down the path of violence and psychosis. Parents, ministers, and teachers were in an uproar. The floodgates of protest opened, and the music stopped.
It almost capsized the industry. They started, a lot of companies went completely out of business, and the most creative company, EC, was down to their final title, which is Mad Magazine. And everything else that was coming out was just purely homogenized.
Okay.
It pretty much killed the industry for 20 years.
What saved the Cape Crusaders, what saved the comic book industry as a whole were these specialty shops, stores devoted to the art, adventure, and collectability of comic books. 5 years ago, there were only 100 such stores. Today, there are more than 4,000 nationwide.
With the advent of shops like mine, the big companies, Marvel and DC in particular, saw that it was possible to put out a product that older people would be interested in a more adult way.
Another factor was the growth of the independents, small publishers who grew out of the underground comics industry of the 1960s to challenge the major companies with titles such as ElfQuest and American Flag. Unusual titles with harder stories and art that proved to DC and Marvel that comic books weren't just for kids anymore.
They forced the two big comic companies, Marvel and DC, to realize that there is an adult audience out there. Since most of the independents aren't available to kids, they're not available at 7-Elevens or stuff, only through specialty stores like this one.
It was, however, a long road back. Just over 100 titles were published by the three major companies in the mid-1970s. By 1985, there were 190 titles. This year, some 300 comic titles are expected to be turned out, with a combined circulation of 150 million issues, generating $300 million in revenue. When most people think of Batman, they think of the 60s TV show, high camp silliness, and an idiotic hero. They'd be shocked to meet the Batman of today, a grim, bitter vigilante who drinks too much, ignores the civil rights of criminals, and sees the justice system as completely ineffective.
Batman originally was a grim avenger that, on the lines of The Shadow. The original idea is here's a kid who saw his parents slaughtered needlessly in front of him, and he was obsessed with catching all criminals.
3 years ago, Superman was a god. He was pushing planets out of their orbits and blowing out stars. Last summer, in a 6-part miniseries, he was completely revamped. And today, he not only shows emotion, but feels winded when he lands a crashing plane and must deal emotionally with a startling realization. He's the last survivor of his home planet.
First of all, they cut off a lot of the dead weight with Superman. He's the last survivor of an alien race. That was the original idea, and it was a good one.
The two standard bearers of the DC line are not alone in their changes. Flash can't run as fast as he used to. Green Lantern is a macho bigot. The characters and their motivations are changing.
The most currently popular is the societally hated hero. Batman has that aspect. As a matter of fact, the only character that's really major who I can think of that is loved by the general society is Superman.
The new characters with their harder, bloodier storylines have brought new life to the classics. This new appeal, based on the creative freedom within the industry, has created a whole new audience for the humble comic book.
More and more people are discovering that comics are not just for kids anymore, that they are more adult-oriented, and I don't mean that in any pejorative sense, and it's a lot of fun, too.
Along with new life for classic characters have come new heroes with stories that are strictly adult in nature. More about them, the new faces on the comic book stand, tomorrow. On Special Assignment, I'm critic at large Greg Moody.
The Nam captures the war, the fear, and the foot soldiers in lurid graphic colors. It's a new dimension in comic book realism, but is it a story meant to be told in comic book form?
You know, I always wondered what I was going to say to my son when he said, "Daddy, what was the war really like?" Now I can show him a comic book. I think it does a pretty good job of portraying the war, minus the blood and guts, minus the foul language, just dealing with the mental issues that went on.
Still, the Nam is only one of a variety of new titles shaking the industry to its very roots. The Watchmen, DC's current miniseries, is a bloody graphic tale of fallen superheroes, crime, and paranoia, all in the shadow of a nuclear war.
It's a book that's totally redefining the superhero genre. It postulates a future world, sort of on a parallel Earth, where in the 1980s Richard Nixon is still president of the United States, and showing what that superhero can and can't do inside his own boundaries.
And there are others, new faces within terrifying fantasy worlds. Madge, a comic warrior armed with an electric baseball bat. The Punisher, a high-tech, heavily armed vigilante. The faces may change, but the issues remain the same. Crime and drugs, war, sex, and interplanetary battle, all within a highly visual fantasy medium, with no reins on creativity or imagination, and certainly no reins on profits. Comics have indeed come full circle, from the golden age of the 1940s through the artistic depression of the 50s, 60s, and 70s to a new golden age in the 1980s.
The new characters in creative freedom are once again adding to a popular art form, creating new magazines, new fans, and a whole new controversy over content, just like in the 1950s. And all this interest in the future of comic books has also sparked an interest in their past. So for collectors, the lowly comic book that maybe went for 10 cents in the 1960s is now going for $210, which makes me wish I had not listened to my mother and thrown them all away. Mom, I had this one. We could have been rich. On Special Assignment, I'm critic at large Greg Moody.